the way into Pio was Mass. And it wasn't until I felt like I started having emotional reactions in Mass that I feel like I was anywhere near playing Pio. And Mass got very emotional, like really, really, really emotional. And then I felt like, okay, now I have permission to go study Pio. So then
there you go. It's about the Mass. So Pio and the Mass. Be honest, I've never watched Padre Pio on YouTube celebrating the Mass.
No.
But what he said here, and what people say is, then there are points during the Mass where he's just weeping. And there are points in my life in receiving the Holy Eucharist where I was weeping. And it's just this emotion that just envelops you and says you just can't believe of what is about to happen. The gift of my God, for me to be a tabernacle is just super emotional. And that's why it's like, one of the things that we say is that, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. Because there are those times that you struggle. It's like, do I really believe? And it's a very emotional moment. And for people who have a hard time understanding that within that host is our Lord Jesus Christ himself, really explore, listen.
Have you ever been to a Mass when the priest is... Yes. That's good. When the priest is, holding up the host and transubstantiation, and the priest just begins to cry.
No.
Like tears. I've been to like a few where that's happened, and I'm like, whoa, like what's going on? It's a very touching moment. It's happened a couple times in my life. And it's like the priest is like crying, and then people just like turn to themselves like, what's going on? Is this really happening? But like, if that's just like a fraction of like, the way Pio would celebrate his Mass, I don't know. It'd be interesting to live in that time and be able to see that.
I mean, I think it's mentioned somewhere else in the interview too, but like St. Augustine weep during the Mass.
I think so. Yeah, I think he did talk about that.
Yeah.
And he was like this, like, big man. And
And Thomas Aquinas too.
Yeah.
Thomas Aquinas. It's funny because, or not funny, in a certain way, in a non-humorous sort of way. Well, I should just say like that it's just so overwhelming. Like when you do, because I feel like, or I don't want to speak for all of us, but I would want to say that all of us had a similar kind of moment during the Mass, maybe during adoration or something, where you kind of just realize almost like what it's all about, like the kind of the sacrifice that of Christ, how unworthy of it you are, but that he still forgives you, that you're saved by grace, something that you did not deserve, and that you're just sitting here and you're in that moment, you're allowed to, like, you're realizing that God is also allowing you to know and be a part of it and to understand the what little we can understand of the mystery. And like, I feel like the only appropriate response is to weep.
Yeah. I always appreciate when the priests, and it's a quick moment, but when the priests say that my sacrifice and yours be made acceptable to God the Father, right? He's pointing it back to the altar and pointing it back to the congregation, because that's the point of, like, we're sacrificing. It really. There are so many times where I'm just zoning out on the Mass because I'm a terrible sinner. But then I hear those words again, and I'm just recentered, and I'm like, that's right. There's a sacrifice that is happening. This is a profound moment. We have to lock in. And so I don't see the extent of the crying, but I do see the extent of the priests not just stating the words, but they're praying the words. They're actually saying, like, these are the words that the sacrifice is made. So it's a very beautiful moment.
Beautiful. Let's move on to that last section that we're going to talk about. We're going to watch. Who was Pio? Or if we're truly
Dun, dun,
Catholic,
dun.
who is Pio? Because we know that
Father Pio,
he is a saint.
not Padre.
Long time to figure him
When
out.
he claimed stigmata, the church at the time sent a bunch of rationalist, unbelieving people who thought miracles were impossible and we were beyond the age of miracles. And he's got his hands wrapped and they're saying, let me see. And he's saying no. And then they write him off. You're a liar.
Yeah.
You're a liar and you're using the church to sensationalize and create a spectacle out here so you can sell keychains or whatever they thought they was doing, you know? And so they write him off as a crazy, as a lunatic, a person who is pimping the church is what they thought. And he had genuinely experienced something.
But it's true of a lot of the mystics, too. That the church has a hard time taking them in at first. And it takes a while to figure them out. But I like how you're using that, though, as a way to your own life experience.
Because again, I'm feeling all this deep identification. Like, here's another example of a man who, when he was exiled, he didn't hit Twitter.
Right.
He didn't go on Twitter and say, I didn't do this, I didn't do that. He just got quiet.
Yeah.
He got quiet and he said, is that so? And then he continued doing what served him and the people that he was serving. He didn't get loud. He didn't do the Martin Luther. He did the St. Francis, which was he quietly got more Christ-like and cultivated that, as opposed to like this rebellion.
He accepted it.
He accepted
the judgment of the church.
Yeah, he could have started his own church, started his own order.
Right.
He had that much following. He could have, at that moment, walked off into the woods and created a whole new sect of Catholicism.
Right. And there are a lot of people in the tradition who did things
Like that. Mm-hmm.
So true. Happens to this day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Comments? Who was Pio?
Speaks to the obedience of faith, right? That's addressed. I mean, there's going to be times where we're not fully understanding of the church's decisions and the directives of the church, and that's the obedient, childlike faith that God calls us to. Is like, you know what? I don't understand why Dad is doing this, why he's telling me to do this, but you know what? I trust in Dad. I trust in God the Father. I trust in her church. So I'm gonna be obedient. I'm not gonna be rebellious. I'm not gonna start a divisive heart, a divisiveness in the church, because that's not gonna bring me to holiness. That's not gonna bring others to the holiness. I'm gonna be obedient, and I think that's a beautiful thing, and I think that's something that we could all learn from, especially in times where we're frustrated. You know, especially when it comes down to the ministerial level. How often do we have things that the priest says, or even the ministry leader as a volunteer say things like, and we just want to rebel. It's like, oh, I'm going to tell this other person, look what happened. Did you hear about what this is? Like, I'm going to still do it anyway. You know, like, I'll just ask for forgiveness. And it's like, there's something wrong about that in our hearts, right? It's not so much about the person, the leader. It's about our own hearts. And I think it speaks very soundly, and it convicts me. And I'm sure that story convicts a lot of us.